So what kind of fuel should you run in your sled? Do you need to run premium? And if not, is there any advantage in it if you do? Let's break it down. Hey there, snowmobilers. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name's David Clark, and if you're not, this is the first video shot in my new shop. I finally got the electrical in this week, and I've spent some time working on storage options and getting some of the stuff off the floor, so I've got some room in here to do some videos and to get my sleds in. In today's video, we're talking about gas. So most gas stations will have 3 kinds of gas, or 4 if you buy a gas station burrito. Basically, you have a regular, a mid-grade, and a premium. Which one should you use in the snowmobile? Are you okay using a regular, or should you use premium? Now, I'll start the video by saying I always run premium fuel in both of my sleds. Now, why do I do that? Well, I started doing it because my older brother told me to. And I do trust his opinion, but let's face it, fuel is really expensive, and there's a big gap between regular fuel and premium. Now, the way I've always looked at it is I'm not buying anywhere near as much fuel for the snowmobile as I do for my truck, for example. So if there's an advantage in using it, then I may as well go for it. But is there really an advantage? So there's a couple of things to look at when you're talking about fuels. Now, the one thing I'm going to touch on just briefly is the additives in fuels. And some of the more expensive fuels might advertise all kinds of additives that'll do great things for you, like, detergents to keep it running cleaner, and friction reducers, and corrosion inhibitors, and things like that. But the 2 things I really want to talk about in this video are octane and ethanol. All right, so we'll start off with octane rating. What is it? And basically you see this at the pump in the form of the selections that you have. So normally there is like an 87, which is your regular fuel. There's an 89, which is a mid-grade, and then a premium or supreme, which is like 91 to 94. Some stations will have an even higher one, but what is it? So what octane rating is, it's basically speaking about the stability of the fuel. So it's the fuel's ability to resist detonation or to tolerate compression without detonation. So what is detonation? Now, in normal combustion, as your piston approaches the top of the cylinder, your spark plug fires, it ignites the fuel in the cylinder, and you get a fairly controlled combustion of that fuel, starting with the spark and propagating through the cylinder. In detonation, you get a fairly violent detonation of fuel elsewhere in the cylinder, independent of that spark. And that's a little bit different from pre-ignition, where you get fuel igniting spontaneously before the spark plug even fires. So where normal compression is going to push down on your piston, detonation will kind of hammer on the piston, and it makes a knocking sound. That's why it's called knock. So knock can occur when there's high pressure and high temperature inside the engine, and it can occur if you're running a fuel with an octane rating too low for the compression in the engine. So obviously knock is bad because it'll reduce performance, it'll reduce fuel efficiency, but it can also damage your engine. Now, knock will cause a pressure spike and increased temperature in the cylinder. So if it's bad enough, it can actually damage things like pistons and rings. Running the wrong spark plug in the machine can also cause knock, so just be careful if you are trying different spark plugs to try to eliminate a fouling problem. The higher the octane rating is, the less likely that fuel is to detonate before that spark occurs. What does all that mean to you, and which fuel you should buy? Well, certain performance sleds are actually going to require a higher octane fuel. So the manufacturers will design your motor with a specific octane rating in mind, and they'll tell you that. So both of my sleds, for example, are meant to run on a fuel of 87 octane or greater, and no more than 10% ethanol. And we'll talk about ethanol later. Now, a lot of the newer sleds will adjust timing electronically. Some of them may even have sensors that will detect knock and adjust the timing accordingly. A lot of older sleds with simple mechanical timing may benefit from or even require higher octane fuels. So there's 2 places I can think of where you can find what fuel you should run in your sled. A lot of sleds, right on the gas cap, it'll tell you. And the other place that's really good is the owner's manual. So actually, that's one really good tip for anybody that's got an older used sled. Find the owner's manual. So service manuals are great too, but at least the owner's manual will give you a lot of really good basic information. What type of oil to use, what type of fuel to use, how to adjust the suspension. If you go to the manufacturer for your particular snowmobile, most of them will have manuals available in electronic format. If it's not there because your sled is older, then Google that, because there's a lot of online resources where you can find manuals. So if you got a sled that calls for 87 octane, is there a problem putting a premium fuel in it? Probably not, other than the increased cost. So you may or may not see an improvement in performance or fuel efficiency. Some guys say it's huge. I think some of that depends on the sled and how you ride. So you may not see that performance improvement, but you won't hurt the sled either. But I would always check with your manufacturer. But if you have a sled that requires a 91 octane or higher, it can harm it if you run a lower octane fuel. Now, just to note, if you are somebody that has a sled that takes 87, but you like to run premium, you're out for the day and you stop somewhere that only has regular, there's a couple small places up here like that I can think of, then you can buy something like this, which is an octane booster. There's a couple of different ones. STP makes one as well. You can add some of this to your fuel and boost the octane rating. So that's octane. Now what about ethanol? So ethanol is the other concern when you're buying fuel for the sled. So first off, what is ethanol? Well, ethanol is alcohol, and it's produced from biomass like wheat and corn, and it's added to fuel primarily to reduce emissions. Now, in the United States and Canada, the addition of ethanol to fuel is actually required by government legislation. So what does that mean? Why is ethanol a bad thing? Well, there's a few downsides to ethanol. So it does burn cleaner, but firstly, it breaks down faster. So if you've got a can of ethanol fuel sitting out in your shed and it's been there for a year, you probably don't want to put it in your sled. Secondly, ethanol can attack things like plastics and rubbers. So things like seals and gaskets and floats and even fuel lines and primer lines, you'll see them turning yellow and cracked from the ethanol. The other problem with ethanol is it will bind to or absorb moisture. So that's a problem when you're storing your sled and you've got ethanol fuel in the tank. Over the course of the summer, it's absorbing moisture out of the air. There's a little experiment you can do to actually see this for yourself. So you get yourself a glass container, and then I'm going to put a little mark on that container, and I'm going to fill it right to that line with water. Then I know exactly how much water I had in the container. I'm going to fill the rest of that container with gasoline, put a cap on it, I'm going to shake it up really well, and then I'm going to let it sit and settle for about 15 minutes. And then what you'll see the gas will actually separate from the water, and you'll see a line where the gasoline is floating on top of the water. But that line will actually be higher than the mark I put on the jar. So that difference is the ethanol. So the same thing is happening in your sled while it's stored. If you have ethanol in the tank, it's absorbing moisture out of the air through the summer. Now, there is some debate out there about how big an issue that actually is. And you'll read articles that say the ethanol can't actively pull moisture out of the air. But you do get condensation in your tank. The ethanol can absorb that condensation. So it's not that it keeps me awake at night, but it's something to be aware of. So there's a couple of things you could do. You could fill the tank all the way, less airspace in there, less moisture getting in the tank. Make sure if you do that you're putting a good stabilizer in the fuel. You could drain the old fuel out of the tank at the beginning of the riding season and put fresh gas in. I think that's probably a better way to go. The other thing some guys will do is look for ethanol-free fuel. The problem is it might be hard to find ethanol-free fuel. So the one dealership I talked to said if you run premium fuel in the sled, then you're not getting ethanol. That's not necessarily the case. So for example, if I go to Petrocan near me, all 3 grades of fuel, including the premium, have up to 10% ethanol. If I go to the Esso station down the road from me, their premium fuel doesn't have ethanol. So my suggestion there is just get online and Google ethanol-free fuels near me. Now, whenever I do a video like this one, I'm always going to get the guy who says, that's a load of nonsense. I've used regular cheap gas in all my sleds since 1959 and I've never had a problem. And I'm not claiming any kind of expertise. I'm not a mechanic. I'm just a guy with a sled, and I'm telling you what I think. All right, so the bottom line, based on the articles that I've read on all of the more experienced riders that tell me to put premium in the sled, the fact my manufacturer says 87 or greater, based on all those things, I'm going to continue to put a premium fuel in the sled. And when I can, I'm going to buy it somewhere where the premium fuel is ethanol free. So whatever fuel you do buy, make sure you're buying at least the minimum octane rating recommended by the manufacturer, or you could end up damaging the sled. So what do you buy? Post something in the comments below. Tell me what you buy and why. So I hope I gave you a few things to think about. Now you can get online and do some reading of your own. If you like that video, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up. I think with that, I'm going to call it a wrap for this one. Until next time, I'm David Clark. Thanks for taking the time to watch. Do you need to run premium? And if not, is there a... There are different additives and there may be more of them or better longevity of their sled, and they feel they can get that from buying a premium fuel. So what does all that mean to you in...